So, Dinaway Maganiduk, Dindisi Indigenicas, Makinakwaju and Dunjiba, Migizi and Dudame. And what I just did was a traditional Ojibwe protocol greeting, and I said, my name is Dindisi, which it means blue jay in Ojibwe, and I'm from Turtle Mountain Reservation in North Dakota, and I am Eagle Clan. My English name is Christine McCleve. I'm the Executive Director for the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition. And today our webinar is on repurposing boarding schools for education and healing. And we have Shannon Martin with us. She is the Executive Director of the Ziibiwing Center. And Willie Johnson was actually not able to join us today, but we do have Mary Margaret Kateri Walker. And I will go ahead and let them introduce themselves. I'm going to hand over the controls to you, Shannon.
Okay.
So you can start projecting your screen whenever you're ready. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, miigwech for having us. Bujun and the Winamani Duk Nango Quen Dishnikas Bijun Dodem, Machi Beneshuish Pottawatomie, Meanwhile, Lakuta Ray Lake Superior Ojibwe Anishinabe Quayendao, Wabasho Ziibiwing Donjaba, meanwhile Saginaw Ojibwe Anishinabe King and Donjaba, Shaganashimo and Majima. Again, following Christine, Ojibwe Anishinabe protocol gave you my spirit name. I'm a member of the Bijou or the Lynx clan, and I'm a citizen of the Machi Beneshuish Band of Pottawatomie or the Gun Lake Tribe, and a descendant of the Lakota Band of Lake Superior Ojibwe. So my mother's Pottawatomie and my father is Ojibwe. And I want to express our appreciation to NABS for having us on this webinar, and also just to extend my prayers out to Willie Johnson and his family. He experienced a loss this week, and that's why he wasn't able to join us. But I have with me today my friend, and I'm going to let her introduce herself to you.
Anish Aushko Benesi Quain Indigenicas Mayingin Indodam. Hello, my name is Mary Margaret Kateri Walker. I am a tribal member of the Saginaw Chippewa Indian Tribe of Michigan. I'm also a descendant of the Little Traverse Bay Bands of Odawa Indians in Harbor Springs, Michigan, where I attended Holy Childhood of Jesus boarding school from 1970 to 1976. I'm also a member of the Deliri family from the Chippewa of the Thames in Muncie, Ontario.
So we're going to talk with you today about repurposing a boarding school site for healing and education. And we're going to back all the way up to how the Mount Pleasant Indian Industrial Boarding School became a Saginaw Chippewa tribal property. We are coming to you, we're speaking from what's called the Ojibwe Language Immersion Room within the Ziibiwing Center. And this room is host to the Mount Pleasant Indian Industrial Boarding School Working Group Committee. And our committee is comprised of tribal citizens, of department representatives, of community members, members from outside the reservation, and also experts and specialists from Central Michigan University and other universities who consult with us. So through these efforts, we are working towards a strategic master plan and a repurposing of the boarding school, former boarding school buildings and site. And we've been doing this work for many, many years. So I'm going to talk with you a little bit about that, genesis of how we've come to the place where we are at now. So back in 2003, Ziibiwing applied for a grant through SAPI Fine Papers of North America. And what we realized is that history books and curriculum that were being offered to not only Native students in our region, but students of other walks of life nationally, the American Indian boarding school history was not present. It was missing from these curriculum guides. So we wrote a grant to develop a curriculum guide called Boarding School Historical Trauma. And through this work, it we were able to distribute the guide through various schools surrounding the reservation. In 2009, we hosted White Bison's Journey for Forgiveness, and that was a planned journey across North America, across the United States, stopping at boarding schools and schools from the West Coast to the East Coast. And Mount Pleasant, the boarding school here, was one of those stops. So in 2009, we hosted the White Bison group, and our community came together to plan for that visit from White Bison. So we provided an education and healing day on the site of the boarding school grounds. And in doing that, we had to call up representatives at the state of Michigan because the state of Michigan owned the property. So we were able to gain permission to stage a day to welcome the Journey for Forgiveness movement at the grounds. And that was in 2009. And that included a 5-mile community walk. So we had a pipe ceremony and prayers here on the reservation. And then the community walked from here, the 5 miles across the city of Mount Pleasant to the west side of Mount Pleasant to the boarding school property. And that's where we spent the rest of the day hearing speakers and just being together in fellowship and talking about the impact of these schools. In 2010, a land conveyance of approximately 8.86 acres that included 6 historic buildings of the Mount Pleasant Indian Industrial Boarding School, as well as the Mission Creek Cemetery, which is not a contiguous cemetery attached to the boarding school site. And that cemetery actually predates the establishment of the boarding school, was offered to the Saginaw Chippewa Indian Tribe of Michigan from the state of Michigan. And Governor Jennifer Granholm signed a public act conveying those acres of land to the tribe for a dollar deed. And then the remaining tract of land that was attached to the former boarding school campus, which was well over 300 acres, that includes today fallow fields and some other buildings that were developed on the site after the boarding school closed. That tract of land was offered to the city of Mount Pleasant. So the tribe and the city of Mount Pleasant had 6 months from October 2010 to April of 2011 to determine whether to accept or reject this land conveyance. So that triggered the Ziibiwing Center and members of our board of directors to establish a community working group and a feasibility study. So we hired a consultant to do this work, to engage with our tribal citizens on, first of all, asking, should we accept or reject a land conveyance? And then bringing about awareness and education about the former boarding school site and its implications and impacts. So that really triggered the first comprehensive survey and dialogue with this community, bringing the Mount Pleasant Indian Industrial Boarding School era to the forefront. That era of time, let me say, the school was established in 1893 and it operated until 1934. So it was operating 41 years and was one of the federal boarding schools that closed after the Merriam Report was issued. Records indicate, administrative records that we have located, indicated that only 5 members, 5 students of the boarding school passed during its 41 years of operation. The feasibility study, the 6 months as we were gathering and harvesting information, both primary source documents and oral histories from Native and non-Native residents of Isabella County and the surrounding counties, as well as going into church records, Mount Pleasant death certificates and newspaper articles. We were able to, at that 6-month feasibility study, determined that there were close to 100 children who perished as a result of the school. So that was in 2010 to 2011. In April of 2011, our tribal chief at the time, Mr. Dennis Keequum, accepted the land conveyance of 8.86 acres of land, including 6 historic buildings and the Mission Creek Cemetery from the state of Michigan. So in 2011, to begin the true spiritual, cultural ownership of the property, we organized the first day of honoring, healing, and remembering on the school property on June 6, 2011. And June 6 of 1934 was the last day that the school was open, and that's when the final student was allowed to go home. So we hold the day of honoring, healing, remembering. It's now an annual event every June 6th, regardless of what day it falls on. Our boarding school committee and supporting departments here on the reservation, as well as partners from Central Michigan University and other schools, come to execute that day and offer it for the community. In 2011, the Saginaw Chippewa Tribal Council sanctions the working group of that feasibility study working group of community members and staff to be officially become the Mount Pleasant Indian Industrial Boarding School Committee. And again, that committee meets bi-weekly right here at the Ziibiwing Center. In 2012, the NABS committee implemented and designed, architected its own strategic plan. And from that plan, preservation of the buildings was paramount for the committee and for this community. So through the feasibility surveys, tribal citizens, 75% overwhelmingly agreed and supported that the buildings needed to be saved somehow and repurposed if possible. Did you want to talk a little bit about the honoring, healing, remembering?
Sure. I also wanted to say Chimi Gwetch for the invitation to speak with you all today by Shannon. As I was growing up in the boarding school in Harbor Springs, Michigan, I wanted to kind of educate the people of the United States and around the world about what was going on at the time, and to put forth my personal philosophy through my work as an actress. So I actually met Shannon when we were attending the University of Michigan. So it's really been a pleasure to come back home and to be invited to many of the beautiful things that go on here at Ziibiwing, and the welcoming and the familiar people and faces that I've missed since I was taken away at the age of 6 to go to the school. My personal philosophy has been through education, we learn understanding, and through understanding, we eventually will get to love. And to me, that drop of water, that pebble that people speak about being thrown into the water that passes for 7 generations, to me, my pebble was one of love and one of positivity. So that's what I do in my work. So being when I attended the boarding school, I was told not to be an actress because it was unethical. They forbid me to speak the language, which I did speak as a small child, and they took away my dance. So for me personally, I'm in the process of re-identifying and re-educating. So by re-identifying, I also was able to, I was gifted a jingle dress by my cousin Sandy Rubin, who lives in Lawrence, Kansas. I just wanted to make a note that the Holy Childhood of Jesus boarding school in Harbor Springs, Michigan was a boarding school that was run by the Catholic nuns. And I know that there's 2 types of boarding schools. That there were industrial schools that taught Native children things that they could do for work. Ours was a Catholic one, which was the epitome of kill the Indian, save the man. So that's why my passion is to work with Shannon. I'm a member of the Mount Pleasant Industrial Indian Boarding School Committee. And the Healing and Remembering ceremony is really amazing. And anyone that can make it here on June 6th, you'll find, speaking from the point of view as a survivor and a thriver of the boarding school, it's a way to reclaim our identities. It's a way to see many beautiful Native faces and to make new connections with people across the United States that have either gone, have siblings that have gone, aunts, uncles, and then grandparents. So the jingle dress ceremony was really amazing. Shannon's dad, George Martin, is one of our premier ambassadors the Great Lakes area. And it's always really an honor to see him lead our people. And he had us enter the circle, and we were escorted by a Native veteran. And as we run around the circle, the veteran men stepped away and we did the dance. When I dance for people who are incarcerated and handicapped. And this day, it was for the people that never got to go home, the little children, the people who don't know who they are, the people that were adopted out, and the people that were told not to speak our languages or not to be who we are. So my life's work is to encourage our self-love, the love of our people, the love of each other, and to put aside the differences that have been taught to us from the inside out society. When I go to the boarding school, I go there a lot to put Sema down, and I leave little treats by the trees for the children. And I speak to them and I tell them that it's okay to go home, that they don't have to stay here, and that what was done to them was wrong, and that they can go with their ancestors. So that makes me feel a little bit better, as if the children were still there, and to let them know that what was done to them was part of an institution, and that we're not the things that they make us out to be, including the stereotypes on TV and the things that we see. So the jingle dress dance ended with the men standing behind us, and they fanned us and they gave us water, which was really incredible because I felt validated as a Anishinabe, as a Native woman, and as we are matrilineal. So to see those gestures come forward and be promoted was really amazing, as was the blessing ceremony that was done at the cemetery before we went to the boarding school property. And that also was a beautiful, beautiful ceremony with the veterans and the flags and the water ceremony and the strawberry ceremony and the teachings that come from that. So it's really great to be a part of Ziibiwing. It's great to be a part of the boarding school committee and a part of our nation again. So I highly recommend learning as much as you can and embracing and reaching out to those that maybe we might not have reached out to before. So that's my little spiel on how important it is. And I thank NABS and everyone that works towards this this goal, because the United States and Canada are the ones that don't know the people of them. Usually they don't know the educators and the people that talk about United States history. In the boarding school, when we had to do Columbus Day and we had to learn American history, I made sure I learned it properly, and now I set that aside, and now it's my time to re-identify and reclaim my own identity. And I encourage everyone that has been touched by this to reach out the same that you are able to. Miigwech,
Kateri. So if you take a look at, I just put up a map, and what this shows is the state of Michigan. And we have 12 federally recognized tribes here within the state. Saginaw Chippewa Tribe territory is situated right in the middle of the Lower Peninsula, so the middle of the mitten. And the boarding school was purposely placed there because the Saginaw Chippewa were a fierce, a mighty tribe, and there are stories of written accounts of them being insolent and roaming and warlike, and they didn't want to be moved east into Indian territories or moved west into the Indian territories. So the Saginaw Chippewa, this boarding school was placed prominently on their reservation to subdue them, to steal their children. But not only the Saginaw Chippewa, through our historical research, we have found that this school brought children from every tribe in the state of Michigan, as well as tribes in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, Ontario, and the state of New York. This next image is probably the most iconic image of the boarding school. This is what was called opening day. And this is from the Dr. Alice Littlefield collection. Alice Littlefield and her family collected extensively everything related to this boarding school. And we're fortunate that they have donated many of these materials or have allowed us to copy the materials for our own research center here at Ziibiwing. This is an image of one of our days of honoring, healing, and remembering. And as you can see, all 12 federally recognized tribal nation flags are present. We received delegations of Agichida and elders for this day from many tribes, as far as Lac-Vieux Desert on the west side of the Upper Peninsula have traveled down to participate. Pokagon Pottawatomie's come every year, Gun Lake Pottawatomie, and then descendants of former students make their way here from various tribes. We honor Central Michigan University and their partnership with the boarding school committee. So they're here as well. Did you want to talk a little bit about this grand entry?
This grand entry is when we are coming in, when the pipe ceremony's been done and we're coming in to honor our ancestors. During this time, they also do a reading of the ancestors that we know that have perished at the school. There's 227 names that are listed. And I can't tell you how chilling it is to hear your ancestor's name out loud unexpectedly, and to take the pride of being able to be here regardless of what's been done to us. So reclaiming our identities is really super important. That they might have tried to put out these manuals to exterminate us, but we are here and we're present, and this is a beautiful way to share in our community. We also share not only in the prayers and the dance, but we also share art in our artwork and in food. We also have a sacred fire, so people can speak to their tobacco, their sema, and say their prayers around the fire as well.
And this is a picture of my dad. Actually, he's one of the pipe carriers that comes every year. And sitting in front of him are all the students from the Saginaw Chippewa Academy. So they're bused there for the morning to participate. And some days we have 7 pipe carriers. At one time we had 15. And they set up their pipe placements in front of them and allow these students to come up and handle things, talk with them. So it gives the students an opportunity to meet these spiritual people from different tribes. So in doing this day, in repurposing this site, we do it through our spirituality, through the culture. We encourage everyone to speak the language while they're here during this day. And through those efforts, we truly believe that that energy and strength continues to assist this tribe and the committee to move forward in repurposing and preserving the site. And we held our first field school with Central Michigan University back in 2013. And the purpose of the field school was to do some non-invasive investigation on the city of Mount Pleasant's property. So again, remember they were deeded over 300 acres of the former school. And through oral history and interviews, we were able to document that there may have been an unmarked cemetery north of the boarding school central campus. So we wanted to build the relationship with the city of Mount Pleasant to do some archaeological non-invasive investigations to hopefully try to locate if there was an unmarked cemetery or grave site of these students. You want to talk more about that?
So about the school.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Sarah Evans is a doctor from Central Michigan University, and she brings students that are interested in archaeological studies, social services and the like. And they come, Central Michigan has been really awesome in their support and encouragement of helping us around the boarding school area. So Dr. Evans has brought students there because we are looking for evidence around the areas that we'd like to put a fence to protect the buildings. We have a problem with vandalism and people that watch ghost hunting shows and they want to come and look inside the school. But the school is a little bit dangerous with the lead and asbestos. So we encourage people not to get too near it. So Dr. Evans is helping with the field school to when they shovel dig to make sure that they're not uncovering or discovering anything that might be in the earth, so that we can put a fence around the property and protect the school and the school grounds. In 2015, the Saginaw Chippewa Indian Tribe submitted the NABS National Register of Historic Places, the NRHP application form to the state of Michigan. The NRHP coordinated for review. In 2017, the National Park Service, the United States Department of the Interior, notified the Saginaw Chippewa Indian Tribe that it did indeed list the Mount Pleasant Industrial Indian Boarding School of Mount Pleasant, Michigan, Isabella County, in the National Registration of Historic Places. The property encompasses extant former buildings and the grounds associated with them and the Mission Creek Cemetery, including agricultural and woodland areas that historically formed parts of the school campus. The keeper of the National Register listed the property on February 29th, 2018.
Yeah.
In 2019, a Mount Pleasant Indian boarding school session entitled A Discussion of Tribally Driven Research and Programs was presented at the American Association for State and Local History's annual conference in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania on August 28, 2019. Shannon Martin, director of the Ziibiwing Center, presented the only tribal session focused on the Native American boarding school era and the MIBS site. In 2019, the Saginaw Indian Chippewa Tribe of Michigan and Ziibiwing Cultural Center were awarded an Institute of Museum and Library Services Inspire Grants for Small Museums program grant to implement a week of events for the 200th anniversary of the signing of the 1819 Treaty of Saginaw. The Weaving of Our Stories event included a treaty summit day, History of the Three Fires Confederacy lecture, basket maker gathering and market, and culminated with a STEAM, which is Science, Technology, Engineering, Art, and Math Education Day at the NABS site. Over 300 middle and high school students participated, including informational tours of NABS. I just want to say personally, it was really wonderful to come to the Ziibiwing Cultural Center and to be able to make and learn these baskets. So Ziibiwing has been really amazing, not only in the boarding school reclamation of knowledge and of acknowledgement of what's been done to us, but they do a lot of programs to help us reclaim our culture here. So we got to learn how to make the ash baskets. And there is a big strawberry one that's here in the lobby. And there's a box there where you can write words for they're going to put the words, the wishes in there for 13 years. It's kind of a time capsule, but it's in the shape of a beautiful strawberry with little strawberries around it.
So over the years, we host sessions where we train students, from sociology students, social work students, anthropology and archaeology, and history. This is Willie Johnson, our curator, and he is giving an in-service to the Archaeological Field School that was just held this year. These students spent 2 days here at Ziibiwing prior to even stepping foot on the boarding school property. And this is this year's field school under the principal investigator, Dr. Sarah Surface Evans. And what they are doing is some shovel test pits at various intervals to ensure that no cultural or historical resources will be impacted when we place a protective fence around two of the most viable buildings on the property. National Park Service gave us a grant to provide protected fencing and lighting to preserve and save these two buildings because of trespassers, ghost hunters. And talk about the Agitchida.
The Agitchida Society took a call to action around the time of Devil's Night, which is October 30th, and Halloween night, October 31st. They bring themselves and they act as guardians. So they protect the site for people that might be looking for, you know, ghosts, or I think it might be a fun place to investigate on these nights. I just want to give you a little personal story about the boarding school. When I went there on Devil's Night, they would take us and leave us at the cemetery and make us run back. They would also put flour on the floor and call it devil's powder, and said the devil would come to steal our soul, that he could see through hell through that powder. So a lot of the education that's going for these kinds of things that were done to us, and the things that people learned from the television, really need to be highly addressed. And the Agitchida, the Warrior Society, they always step forward and take care of us in this manner of protecting us. So it was windy, it was rainy, and they stayed out there for the 2 nights and took care of the boarding school property. This is a quilt made by the In Stitches Society that was made to honor the Indian children at the Mount Pleasant Indian Industrial Boarding School in Mount Pleasant, Michigan. As I previously mentioned, Ziibiwing Cultural Center also gives us many programs, and another one that we learned was how to make baby quilts. So it's really lovely to see the grandmothers and these quilting people that have this knowledge sharing their knowledge and their talents, and Ziibiwing encouraging us to participate in these programs, and thus re-identifying ourselves and re-educating ourselves to our culture.
This particular quilt was done by the tribal elders. They're called In Stitches because they like to laugh when they quilt. But on the flip side of this quilt, they wrote in the 227 names of the children who perished during the operation of the school. This particular quilt has been featured in a publication done by the Michigan State University Museum and the Smithsonian, and that book is about human rights. And so this quilt is part of that catalog. This is a healing guitar, and this was commissioned by a private donor who worked with our curator, Willie Johnson, and with tribal artist Ben Hinman, who created the artwork. This is a acoustic Keras acoustic guitar, and it's not a showpiece. It's not meant to stay in the tribal collection, not to be touched, but to be played.
And in playing this, we pass that music on, and we share in the beauty of music that sometimes we can't speak things, but we can pass through them emotionally. So this is a beautiful guitar by one of our native artists, as Shannon said, Ben Hinman. So there's also been donated a jingle dress that represents water, and that's also used during some of the dancing ceremonies. So a lot of our gifts are working gifts, not necessarily just to be shown, but to actually be used.
And this is a picture of Pigo Pelcher family. They are sitting on the front step of what's called the Stone House. This is the next phase of the project for the boarding school committee. We received a grant from the National Park Service for underrepresented communities. And we are going to begin to document and investigate the Stone House for the next 2 years. And through talking with the descendants of the family, this house is still situated on original allotment land. It's just north of the boarding school, about 5 miles, and it's along the route of a railroad track. So in talking with the family, they have oral history that this was a way station, somewhat of an underground railroad for runaway students. The Pigo Pelcher family used this house and their allotment as a working farm, and they offered their home and their land as one of the outing farms for the boarding school. And they did this so that they could at least provide a safe place for students to leave the boarding school and go work. Because we know through other accounts that the outing program was nothing but abusive and child labor. And we have documented many students died while they were in the outing program. So this grant is going to provide us with a historical architect consultant as well as archaeological consultant so that we can take a look at the original property and also document oral history and harvest photos like this that might be in old photo albums on the reservation in many family homes. And this is currently what the stone house looks like. This picture was taken last summer. And so we're really excited to begin this work and make the connection of an underground railroad to the boarding school site. And we hope to work towards getting this stone house preserved and placed on the National Register as well. So it's truly exciting work, and we thank the National Park Service for continuing to support us in these endeavors to preserve these historical places, especially the Mount Pleasant Indian Industrial Boarding School. So at that time, that is the end of our PowerPoint pictures. But we wanted to express that the work is intensive. It stirs a lot of emotions at many levels for the committee members and new committee members who join us. And the Day of Honoring, Healing, Remembering, the annual event, is drawing more and more people. So the education, the healing, the awareness is happening, and we continue to do what we can to spiritually provide opportunity and culturally provide opportunity for our people to engage at the site and to have these conversations in a safe place, in a safe way. Ziibiwing Center is committed to continuing locating more documents and harvesting more information about the Mount Pleasant Indian Industrial Boarding School. We are committed to finding more partners to help us preserve the buildings, to repurpose them. We are currently writing a grant, hopefully to get funded to bring on a master planner for 1 year to help us develop a master plan to fundraise and to bring these at least one of these buildings back to life and repurpose a building to become an interpretive center, a place to promote healing, wellness. These are all desires of the community, promoting the language, the culture, providing the history. So we're hoping to move in that direction.
I just want to say thank you again for having us as your guests. It's been a pleasure, and I want to thank you for your interest in the boarding school issues across the United States and Canada. And just want to say Chimigwech for having us as guests.
Aw, well, Chimigwitz right back at you two beautiful Ikwe's. That was an amazing talk. Very, very heartfelt stories and just a beautiful movement happening in your community and in Michigan as a whole. Hearing about how so many tribes come, and I was there for the Day of Remembrance and Healing this past June, and you guys had a delegation of chiefs that came all the way from Canada. So really, I think what's going on in the community there is an example for many other communities around Turtle Island who want to preserve and honor this history. And I think just kind of like high level view of what you're doing, it involves not only the technical aspects of building preservation, you know, the conveyance of the land and all those technical things that happen that involve, you know, politics and legal issues with land titles, but then also and also, so it's really actually kind of there's multi pieces to it. So, you know, you're also talking about being registered as a historical landmark and then getting into some of the historical records, working with archaeologists and archivists. But what I'm really excited about is the work that you guys are doing around oral histories, around addressing the spiritual impacts on the community, on the boarding school survivors, on the descendants. And thank you so much, Kateri, for sharing some of those personal experiences, as difficult as it is to hear about those things that happened. It's extremely important that we talk about those, that we bring those things out into the light, not only for our individual healing, but as an example to others, to talk about what happened so that it doesn't happen again. So we've got a few questions, and I'll let you guys decide who's gonna answer. But first one is, what are the center's plans for expanding capabilities for capturing oral histories?
Okay, we are actually going to launch that this year with the National Park Service Underrepresented Grants project that is focusing on the Stone House. but we're hoping to capture oral history from those families, as well as any other family descended from students that attended the school. So we're working with our IT department. We're thankful we have Dr. Suzanne Cross, a tribal member from Saginaw Chippewa, who is on our board of directors, and she has done some extensive work with oral history across the nation on boarding schools and survivors. So we've started to document and capture oral history. Just in September, we had a week focused on the commemoration recognition of the Treaty of 1819 and its impact on our people, and the historical impact, but what are the contemporary impacts that that treaty set aside for us. So that treaty week, we brought in basket weavers from all over Michigan, Wisconsin, and as far as Quebec to engage with one another, and there were oral histories captured at that basket weavers gathering about the impacts of boarding in residential schools on families and how it's contemporarily is still resounding within our families and communities, impacting our language and our artistic lifeways. So Dr. Cross and 2 youth filmmakers captured those oral histories during that basket makers gathering. So we're building off that momentum. With the Stone House, we have our first family and descendant dinner. We're going to host on December 4th here at the Ziibiwing Center. And in that, we're going to launch the grant project and express to the family members of the Stone House and any descendants of former boarding school students, opportunities for them to be a part of this grant project, whether working at a field school and earning certification on how to do some archaeological work, investigation, or working as an interviewer and documenting oral history. So this is a 2-year project, and that's really, we're truly hoping to launch oral history from this boarding school era through descendants.
Well, that's a beautiful vision and quite the process. So we will continue to add our prayers to the collective for this work that you are doing. I particularly appreciate how you mentioned that the ceremony and the prayers does support this work. As we know at the Boarding School Healing Coalition, that this work, it can be very, very arduous. It can be very difficult at times. And it can be difficult to bear for your own spirit and your own heart. So to make sure that you're taking care of your spirit and your heart is extremely important, and doing that in community is of course the best way to uplift ourselves and each other. So we have a couple more questions, but I just want to also mention that we're very excited that Dr. Suzanne Cross will be presenting at our conference that's coming up in a couple weeks in Tulalip. So if anybody is on the line who hasn't registered, you should go to boardingschoolhealing.org and come join us at the conference. And a couple more questions here. Can you describe some of the ways in which the center is engaging tribal youth with the boarding school history? You talked a little bit about, I think that question might be addressed to when you had the students there. Is there, that was just one particular, they looked like about elementary age, or is there anything with high school students?
Yeah, we're actually starting those efforts and have been the last few years, offering opportunities to provide boarding school history to school groups when they come here to the Ziibiwing Center. We do a lot of focused discussion on that through our permanent exhibit that does have elements of the boarding school inside our permanent exhibition. So our interpreter tour guides spend time there and work with students. This part of that 1819 Treaty Week, we had a STEAM day on the grounds of the boarding school, and it was a full day. We served over 400 students from Isabella County who were bused in, to learn about not only STEAM activities, but also they were given a tour of the boarding school grounds and its history. And what that prompted, and this is the exciting part, and how our prayers and our energy in repurposing the site is continuing to move us into positive directions regarding that place. There were many Native students from this tribe and other tribes in the area who came with those high schools and with their peers. And some of the Native students came up to me and said, Shannon, is it possible if we could be trained to give tours? And I said, absolutely. So that happened on Friday, September 25th. We had a few students who were interested in giving tours to their peers at the boarding school. Then within the last month, we had 2 openings for youth workers, part-time youth workers, and we hired 2 young ladies. One youth worker is 14, the other is 15, and they attend 2 local high schools here. And they expressed that same desire. So they said, can we plan a day to have our high school go up to the boarding school? And we would like our peers to learn more about it. And I said, absolutely. I said, how about if we train you all to give these interpretive tours in history, you host your peers, and we'll make sure that those days happen. So they're now recruiting other Native students to come to Ziibiwing this winter, in which our staff is going to train them on the boarding school era and on that property to talk about the different buildings and what's been happening at the school contemporarily. So it's exciting. Our youth want to learn more about it, and they want to be teachers about it and share their own viewpoints and their own family history that's connected to these schools.
That is so beautiful. That touches my heart. I really wish that I had the opportunity to learn as a youth about this history instead of waiting far into adulthood and feeling this desperation to look at it because of the intergenerational impacts. If we can explain this to our youth at a younger age, that gives them greater wisdom and understanding to take them forward as they journey throughout their lives. So one last question. We know that you all were involved with our filing to the United Nations on the children who went missing at boarding schools. The United States has not given any answers as to the fate or whereabouts of some of those children who died or went missing. And can you talk a little bit about the research that you contributed to that filing, specifically about the discrepancies in the federal records?
Yeah, and I alluded to that earlier in the webinar, that when we first began this journey to uncover the truth and the history of the school, during that feasibility study, when we were posed with receiving this land and the buildings, administrative records that we harvested from the Library of Congress indicated, we poured through those, our committee and our consultant, indicated that only 5 children perished as a result of the school during its 41 years of operation. From that point forward until today, we have uncovered 227 deaths that can be directly related to the school, whether it's on the school proper, on the grounds during the operation, by uncovering death certificates and records, but also through the outing programs, newspaper articles, primary source articles that our volunteer researchers have uncovered, not only here in Mount Pleasant, but in Saginaw and other surrounding communities where the outing program was, as far as the outing program reached, we've been finding articles. 14-year-old Native boy died on the Johnson farm this summer from unknown causes. So we're finding these types of articles and knowing that some of these students died while they were in the outing program. So that number is now 227. Where they are resting, where they are buried, whether they were given a proper burial or not, we do not know. So our investigations are continuing. We are still hoping to gain more access to the city of Mount Pleasant's land to do some more archaeological investigations there. But we have to, we have to move cautiously and respectfully with them as well. I mean, their land that they received, they're hoping to turn it into, a financial gain. And so the notion that the school and possibly an unmarked graveyard, a cemetery or a burial pit is on their property is not, very desirable for anyone who wants to purchase land from them. But, so we're working through those types of sensitive issues between the tribal and the city government. But, it's important that we locate these students. So our team is researching. Some of these students were sent home, trying to find homestead cemeteries, knowledge of tribal cemeteries. Some of these students passed away at the school and were shipped home. We're following those types of leads as well. But for the most part, there is an oral history that there is a unmarked cemetery on the property. So we're hoping to keep the non-invasive archaeological investigations moving forward with the city of Mount Pleasant.
Thank you.
So that was, the research we provided for the UN case was, these deaths and the missing children attributed to this school.
Right. Yes, and the fact that the federal records are inaccurate and incomplete, and speaks to the fact that they not only have not acknowledged or accepted responsibility, but they don't even probably don't even know what the totality of what they should be accepting responsibility for is. So the coalition and others continue to do this research and to work with wonderful coalition partners like you all at Ziibiwing. We thank you for your time today and sharing with us, and we know that you are a beacon of hope for others around the country who want to preserve their boarding school buildings or their history with the boarding schools. So thank you so much for sharing with us today, and look forward to continuing working with you in partnership around illuminating this history and talking about the truth in history, and also the history from Native perspectives with our stories and our worldview. So we will post the recording of this webinar online in the coming weeks and months, and you guys can keep an eye out for that. And so in closing, I just want to say again, miigwech.
Miigwech.
Closing remarks.
And one final offer is our boarding school curriculum guide is on the Ziibiwing Center website under media resources, and it's downloadable. It's free to use, and there are many high schools and universities across the country who have added this to their reading list and curriculum. So that is free for you. It's about 25 pages and gives a history of the school as well as of this era of time.
And I'd like to just say in closing too that we were, as a family, we didn't speak about this until 2007. So this truth and everything coming out is new. So encourage everyone to learn about it, but don't dishearten yourself that you didn't learn sooner, because we weren't allowed to speak about it. When we did speak about it, we took the brunt of the retaliation from the school. So also these educational, the media and the educational guides are really great in helping us to come to terms with the the racism and the bullying that we still encounter in our school systems. So I just want to say that and thank you.
And in closing, those that are doing this work on this boarding school era, any work in repatriation, use everything you can through your culture, through your community knowledge to take care of yourselves personally. The work is hard. What you uncover can be devastating, especially in researching in archives. Be prepared, take your medicines with you. We always encourage that here at Ziibiwing. So use your medicines, use your teachings, whatever spiritual path you follow, keep your faith and keep doing the work. But through that work, we know our ancestors are helping us. They're giving us strength. They're helping to guide us and helping us to reveal and put together these histories. My grandmother attended the Mount Pleasant Indian Industrial Boarding School. We never talked about it in our family. I didn't know she attended the school till almost 10 years after her death, and it was just never discussed in our family. But tonight I'm going to a ghost supper, a spirit feast here on the reservation, and I'm going to bring her favorite food, and I'm going to bring her picture, and I'm going to remember her and talk about her. But she was a former student of this school, so a lot of us here are connected to one or more of these schools. But Eyangwam is in our language, and that means be determined, but also be careful and be diligent.
And Miigwech, what was the website with the curriculum resource?
www.sagchip.org/Ziibiwing. And then we have tabs there, so it's under our media tab, and you can download the curriculum guide.
Awesome. I believe we also have it listed in our resource database. So you can either go to the sagchip.org to find it, or you can go to boardingschoolhealing.org to find it. And so thank you for those excellent words of wisdom, and Miigwech for being with us here today.
Miigwech.
Gigawabaman.
Bamapi.
Bamapi.